So the first thing is I'm going to create a new song, and I'll use the starting point. I'm going to put it in my Lydian folder, and I'm going to call this, I don't know, what have I got around me here? I've got a knife, so I'm going to call it razor. I don't even know why I have a knife in here. Okay, so the first thing is we want to use a drum loop for this. We haven't learned to program our own drums yet, so we're going to actually create all of the parts ourselves this time from MIDI, and then we're going to use a drum loop. And then soon we will learn how to create our own drums too, and then we'll be able to compose the entire thing ourselves, but for now, we'll stick with it like this. So I'm going to grab a drum loop. Now you could grab loops from Lydian Loops Volume 1 or 2, or from the built-in stuff here. So I may do that, and I'm going to take maybe, I don't know, let's see, what's in the pop. And then I'm going to look for drums, and then loops. So I'm just going to listen to a few of these and see what's going on. I quite like this one. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. So it's telling me that the tempo here is supposed to be 100. Now, of course, I can leave it at 120, and that's what maybe we're not even hearing that now. This thing here says play at song tempo. What I'm hearing right now is the original tempo. But if I push this button, it will play at 120, which is the song tempo I have now. But that's too fast for me. So I would rather put my tempo down to 100 and then use the loop as it's intended. So I'm going to take this and just throw it in right there. So I'll call this drums. Okay, the next thing to do is create a chord progression. Now, if you haven't completed the task from the previous section about creating chord progressions, you need to go do that now. You need to have a good understanding about this chord progression creation process using the diatonic chords in a scale so that we can do that here. So if you haven't done that, I recommend you go back and do that now. If you have done that, then I'm going to proceed and show you what I'm going to do, and when we come to the task, you can do it yourself. For this example, I'm going to use probably a presence sound, but you could totally use a sound from Mai Tai as well if you wanted a synth instead of a acoustic instrument. So I'll grab presence now. You notice when I click on presence, I can actually start looking at my presets here, which could be of interest, and I think I will use some sort of electric piano, and let's just pick one and see how it goes. I'm going to grab this EP suitcase and stick it right here, and I'm just going to play this. Not really what I'm looking for. So I'm going to find a sound I like. I'll start back at the top. Okay, I like this EP Funky Roads sound here. It's kind of got the vibe I'm looking for. Okay, now it's time to write the chord progression. So, if you recall, we're going to do this using the diatonic chords of the key. That is that I'm going to write this in C major, as you should as well, unless you have more experience and you want to try and write in a different scale. And I'm going to use those 6 chords. Remember, chords from 1 to 6 are very usable and we can put them in any order. But chord 7 is a little bit funky sounding, maybe not in a good way sometimes, and it could be best to stay away from that for now. All right, I've opened up my little keyboard view down here, which is, in case you're wondering, not part of Studio One. This is another app entirely called Chordie, C-H-O-R-D-I-E, that just allows you to visualize a keyboard in a real nice way, just to make sure you can see what's going on. So what I'm going to do is set a loop around my drum loop. So I'm going to push Shift P when I click on it, which puts a loop around the exact size of the drum loop. Use slash to turn my loop on. Now we got this thing going on. So the first thing to do is come up with the chord progression. So the chord progression is going to be some combination of these chords: C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor. If that doesn't make sense to you as to why I'm choosing those chords, go back to the chords section and double check your information there and make sure you understand that. So I'm going to choose a few of these chords and I'm just going to experiment for a little bit, and then I'll come back to you when I've decided on a progression. Okay, I've got a chord progression here. The chords I'm going to use are F, E minor, D minor, down to A minor. That's the 4th chord, 3rd chord, 2nd chord, and 6th chord in the key of C major. So I'm going to play it along with the drum track, and then I'm going to quantize it and just to get it set up well here. So I'll push record. F, E minor, D minor, A minor. Okay, so now I'll come into my MIDI view. I'm going to push Command A or Control A. That's going to select everything. A for all. Select all. And then I will grab one of the ends, hold Command, and make everything the same length, which in this case is going to be 1 bar long, just like we did in the previous examples. So now I will play this. Now this is all totally fine, and we could leave this just as it is right now, but what we could also do is create some kind of rhythms out of these bar-long chords that we've got right now. So they don't have to last the entire bar. They could play different rhythms. So I could maybe give an example of that. If I drag this back and maybe have it last only this long and pull another one out, here's what it sounds like. So that's interesting. What if I do this? And now I'll grab this one, put it maybe here. And take this, maybe here. Maybe this should go here. So that's kind of a cool rhythm. And now I could replicate this rhythm across every chord. However, I have a different idea. I'm going to alternate between this rhythm and a different one, kind of like this. So now for this one, I am going to take the same rhythm that I had with this one. So how am I going to do that? Well, I could just go and copy it piece by piece, but instead I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to take this entire chord and its rhythm, drag it and copy it over and put it on the correct note, which is D. Now the one thing I have to remember is that this is a major chord. This is F major, E minor, D minor. If I just took this major chord here and put it on the D, now I'm playing D major. If you look at the little piano roll here that you can see in the background, see this 2 black, 1 black, 2 black, and here is the note C. So if I move up, this is C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp. Now F sharp is a black key, which is not in the key of C major, so this note wouldn't work in this key, or at least not in the way we're going to do it right now. It's non-diatonic. It's not a diatonic note of the scale of C major. So I'm going to take it and lower it down. Because remember, the only difference between a major and a minor chord is that the middle note is lowered by 1. So here now we have D, F, and A, and that's a D minor chord. Now we have this. Right, so that's kind of cool. And I will take this one's rhythm and put it here, just for simplicity's sake. And there we have it. I'm just going to quantize this because something feels a little bit funny about it. There we go. So there's my 4-chord progression. Now each chord has its own rhythm, and so it feels a little bit more interesting. And to get those rhythms, you just play with it. Try different possibilities, copy things, paste things. You can play just on your keyboard, and as the drum loop is playing, you can try your own rhythms on top instead of doing it manually like this in the piano roll in the MIDI editor. So whichever way you want to do it is fine. You can even just leave the chords holding for the whole bar, because sometimes that's a good idea too, depending on what sound you're using. So I like this rhythm for these chords. So it's time to add the bass line to this, and we're going to use the bass patch that we created in the previous videos, which is in Mai Tai. So I'll come grab Mai Tai and throw it on here, and then remember I saved it under Max Bass 1. And here's my bass sound. So I'm going to write my bass line according to these chords. Now, if you remember, the important thing to do here is follow the root notes of the chords. So you have to know what chords you're playing. Remember, I'm playing F, E, D, A. So I want my bass notes to change at the same time that those chords change, so that they move in unison together and they're not clashing in some strange way. So I could draw that in manually, I could play it in. There's a variety of ways to get it in there. I could even just copy this chord section down and delete the other notes. What I'll do is, I'll draw it in this case, because it's so simple. So here I am in my piano roll for this instrument. I can call this bass so I don't get confused. And then I want to find the right octave. The first note was an F. Here's an F, and that's a pretty low sounding F. This is a super high, not super high, but it's a high sounding F for a bass. But this F is kind of more appropriate to use if we're trying to get a kind of big bass line. So I'm going to use this F. If we went to the F below, this is too low, obviously. So I'm going to use this one. I'll double click to get a note, and I'll drag it out for one bar. So that sits against it like that. I'm going to duplicate this, put it on the E, duplicate this, and this time I'm going to put it not to this D, because it's getting a bit low for this song, I think. I'm going to go up to this D, and then I'm going to duplicate that and put it down to this A. So that's something to notice, that I can use this D or this D, this A or a higher A, this E or a higher E. It doesn't have to follow exactly which E, like in the order. The chords are descending all the time, right? F, E, D, A. I don't have to do that. I could do any F, any D, any E, whatever I want to do. So let's hear what this is like now. So now it's time to create a rhythm for this bass line like we did in a previous lesson. I could copy the rhythm of the chords because it's definitely interesting and moving around a lot, but I could have a separate rhythm too. I'm going to experiment just for a little bit and see what I come up with. Okay, I got my bass line here. Let's first take a listen to it. Actually, maybe turn it up a little bit just so we can hear it more clearly. So it's quite similar to the way the chords are played, with some slight differences. Here I've got my F, and this is the octave of F. Boom, bum, bum, ba, boom. Now what's important to note is that this is really following the drums, and this is a very common practice, is that the bass line is tied in a meaningful way to the drum pattern. So if we listen to the drums on their own, and then we hear the bass. Do, da, 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 do. So it follows the drums to a certain extent. So when the drums hit, boom, the bass hits with it. That's kind of a cool thing to do. For instance, this note hits here on a kick drum. If I put my cursor right there, you can hear that. And it stops where the snare drum hits. So it's like the kick drum is turning the note on and the snare drum is stopping it. So it's almost like they're working together, where parts of the drums work with the bass line to turn notes on and off and get tied together in a certain way. So this bass line is half following the chord rhythm and also trying to work itself in with the drums. In the second bar here, it follows very much the chord rhythm. but with an octave jump there. And this bar is the same as this bar, except no octave jump. Because I found when I put this up to a next higher D, it got a little bit too high for me, for my taste. But that might be something that you enjoy, so I kept them all the same note. And this last bar is identical to this one, except there's no octave jump as well. It stays on the A the whole time. So there's no real like rules to this. It's just what do you think sounds good, that's all. And so you just try out possibilities, putting certain notes up octaves, down octaves, repeating the note, taking away certain notes, moving them around. Just try things, and you'll discover ones that sound good to you, and if it sounds good to you, it is good. That's all there is to it. So now that I've got my bass line, I'm going to put a melody to this, and then we will have completed the chords, the bass line, and the melody on top of a drum loop. So I'm going to get a sound for that, maybe a synth in this case. Let's try that out. Actually, one thing I wanted to do is go into my bass sound and actually turn the cutoff down a little bit on this filter, because right now it's not bad, but I want it more like this. Softer, like that. So I'm going to do that and hear how it sounds now. Pretty good. I think it needs to be turned up a little bit. I'm going to turn it up from inside of the instrument, inside the synth. In the global section, there's this volume knob. I can just turn that up. Like that, maybe it's fine. Okay, time for the melody. All right, I got a synth that I like here, which is this preset called Pickup. So I'm just going to play some melodies like we've learned before in C major. And I'm just going to experiment for a while over top of this chord progression. And then when I find something I like, I'll stick with that and I'll show you what I got. Okay, so I've settled on a melody. I'm just going to record it now. So that's the sound, the melody. You could leave it unquantized or do whatever you want. I'm just going to quantize it just for the ease of it right now. And I want to point out a couple things about this melody that might be of interest to you. There is some things that you can learn about writing melodies so that they are not just random, but kind of have some meaning behind them. And a lot of times this sort of stuff isn't planned ahead of time, but if you are aware of it, you can make decisions that are maybe similar to that. So in the first section of the melody, there's a little movement. It goes high, then to low is a big leap down, and then it comes back to a note right under the first one. The next phrase is the same motion almost exactly. It goes, it's a note that's high, goes to a note lower, and jumps back. So that's, I changed the rhythm a little bit in the second one, so it's not an exact duplicate, like it could have been this. But I moved that note a little bit over to give some change, but that's an interesting thing to do. Once you've stated one thing, you can state it again in a different place. What I mean by stating it is just you've played a certain kind of shape to your melody. It starts high, goes low, and comes back. Then I do the same thing, but I moved it down, high, low, and back again. Or it could have gone up, or could have done all sorts of things. That's an interesting concept. Then on the third time around, I've sort of changed it. So it's high, low, mid, high, low, mid, and this is different. And then I have this at the top here, at the end. So this is a little phrase that gets stated in one octave. And then I do the exact same thing an octave higher, kind of to reinforce that ending quality of that phrase. So here's the whole thing again. So that's the melody for this section. I've got chords, I've got bass, I've got melody, I've got my drum loop. The only thing left to do here would be to add some maybe percussion or other background elements if you want of any kind, effects or anything that you can find, just to put some more stuff and fill it out a little bit. But you don't want to go too much because it will get too busy, right? So you want to always manage how much you're going to put in there versus what can the listener focus on? What starts to feel too confusing, like too much is happening? So I like it is now. I'll probably end up adding a little bit, maybe some percussion or maybe something soft in the background. I'm not sure yet, but I'll figure something out and we'll check it out in a future video. But this is the process of how we go about it, starting with the drum loop, making the chords, changing the rhythm of the chords, making the bass line, changing the rhythm of the bass line, and then adding a melody. This is one way to go about composing a section of a song. So don't just pick some random things and plunk your hands down. You got to know what they are. So if someone asks you or your teacher asks you, what are those chords? Even if you forget, you can figure them out by looking at them on the MIDI piano roll, or the MIDI editor. But it'd be good maybe to write them down or just to memorize which ones you used, because you need to know what they are if you're going to write the bass line for it, right? So at least at some point you needed to know. It's good to be able to recall that or be able to figure it out by looking at it. Like I could go in and click on my chords and I could just look at them here. I have an F, then it goes up 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Ah, that must be F major. This is E up 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. That must be E minor, based on those chord formulas that we learned. So that's a simple way to figure out again what your chords are, but you could write them down or do whatever. As always, I think it's good to be deliberate in what you're doing, as in, don't pick things just at random. Your chords, your bass line, your melody, even the drum loop. You want to like the sound of your own music. If you're playing some chords and you don't like how they sound, don't use them. If you don't like your melody, don't use it. Do it again. Find some chords you do like. Find a melody you do like. Make sure the bass sounds the way you want it. Don't settle for something just because it was the first thing that came to you, or because it feels difficult maybe to find some new chords. Just give it a try. If you go until you're satisfied, you'll be much happier with the end result. And this is important when we're creating our own music, that we feel confident in the music we've created. So when we show it to somebody, we say, hey, here's my song, I really like it. I'm proud of having made it, as opposed to kind of like, it's not very good, here it is. We want to be proud about our music, or at least be satisfied or be happy with our composition. So take that time to make sure that all the elements are just as you want them. The last thing I'll say is, do not expand this right now. Don't blow it open into a full song like we did before. We're going to learn about a new song structure in the next section, and we're going to use that song structure to expand this song, this loop, into a full song by creating other loops to go around it. So we're going to talk about that next after you finish this task. So I'll see you there.